Introduce yourself.
Okay, hello, my name is John Barron.
And how did you come to Alexander Technique?
Well, I was in my early 20s, and I was living in London at that time, and I was working as an actor. And my girlfriend at that time was doing these Alexander lessons, and so was her father. But meanwhile, I was having a lot of lower back pain too. So basically I got dragged along to a lesson. And at that time, there were the two teachers called Elizabeth and Dick Walker, and they trained with Alexander, and they used to actually go to people's homes in London and work in the homes, and the people there would get other people to come along. And so I went along for this lesson, not knowing really what to expect. And then they're very, very pleasant people, and they started to put their hands on me, both of them actually. They worked both together because they were a couple. And I thought that was how things were, It's not one-on-one, but two-on-one, my goodness. So the first thing that they did was to take me into a squat, which was very confusing because I kept saying as I was off balance and halfway down, well, what do I do now, And their answer was, there wasn't one. And anyhow, by some miraculous way, I ended up on the floor, lying down, and they worked with me, putting hands on while I was lying on the floor. They put me into this position. They went and stuck a book under my head, and I thought, well, I don't know what the hell's going on, so just go into it. So that was interesting. Then they took me up, and again I started to ask a lot of questions, but I realized that they weren't really wanting to field questions. It wasn't a question and answer that they were into. They wanted to create an experience, is what I came to understand. So rather than try and preconceive what's going to happen, I went into an experience that I didn't know, which was very interesting because I found myself being so open, my arms being very long. Now, my girlfriend and her father were observing the whole time too, and I remember he was a much older guy, and he was in his 80s at that time, and he just get, oh, you look like Tarzan, So just this openness without knowing what was going on, but having a totally different experience of how I was in my body. So it was very puzzling, really fascinating, and also, of course, quite enjoyable because I found myself much more at ease. And that's really what I was looking for on some level, to be much easier in myself. Still am, but still, So then I went away from that lesson and came back, and I had, several lessons with them. They came in every week to London, and then they went to another apartment, and I was working with them there. So I'd had this experience of the technique, and I think around about that time I started reading Wilfred Barlow's book, The Alexander Principle, and that made a lot of sense. But then, as I said, I was working in theatre at the time, so you used to get called away. So you go from London, then you go into the provinces to work for a while. It could be a year, it could be 3 months, etc., and then come back. So I was away from it, kind of, but still playing with the ideas. Then later on, I started to work with this fellow called Misha Magadoth, who trained with Patrick MacDonald. Misha, of course, is an Israeli guy. And I took a lot of private lessons from him. I started working with him 3 times a week, then twice a week. And I was really, really fascinated by the work. After a while, he started to tell me that he ran a training school, and that he thought it would be a good idea if I became a teacher. I completely ignored him. just carried on taking lessons. And I thought, Misha's trying to sell me something, and it's fine, But then, being Israeli, he started to really sell me, and he was saying, what I want to do, I want to give you, if you come to my school, there's a long waiting list to come into the school, but I give you what we call proteksiat, which is what the Israelis give to get you to the front of the queue, you see. And I was laughing, and I just thought, this is Misha being Misha, But I actually found out it was kind of true. And then things came to a head, and I decided to go into this training. And I went into the training, and I remember being there the first week because I'd been so busy before I hadn't even been able to visit the school. If I'd been able to visit the school, I actually wouldn't have gone. So I went along to the school, and the first week I thought, what the hell have I done? What am I doing in this place? Trying to work out this stuff, and I thought I'd made the biggest mistake. And it must have been obvious, because one kind person must have felt sorry for me at the end of the week, took me out to lunch to talk to me to see if I was okay, and I wasn't. But I carried on doing this training, and I still carried on with the idea that I'd made a big mistake. And I didn't think I could do this work because I'm not very dexterous with repairs and stuff like that, and I saw a lot of it was hands-on work. So anyhow, I carried on, and then what started to happen was that the work itself started to become more apparent, and then over time I started to enjoy it more, and I could see it was helpful, and that I'd just come kicking and screaming because of my attitudes, etc. And just over time, those started to let go. But I have to be honest, I said to everybody, I never ever meant to do this as a job, or never. And yet I've been doing this now full-time, actually, as a full-time teacher since I went into the training in 1982. I've been doing this since 1985. Yeah, and I kind of like it.
So your initial things, you went in for a little bit of back pain, and you went in...
A lot of back pain at such a young age, because I knew if I was 20-something, 21, 22 something, what am I doing with this back pain? I mean, what's it going to be like when I'm ancient and I'm 40 or something,
And how did the Alexander help with that?
Oh, that became fairly apparent straight away, because the tensions that I'd unwittingly put into myself, I realized were actually causing me to over-tighten in the lumbar spine, and that was addressed. Yeah.
So it was purely a tension issue. It wasn't a congenital issue or anything that.
Well, I do have a lordosis, so that's there. My father used to have these episodes of what he called his lumbago, where his back would go out and he'd spend 3 days lying on a board. Go figure. That was the recommendation at that time. So I had to kind of keep seeing him do that over the years, and I'm thinking, oh God, this is my inheritance, right?
That's your supreme inheritance.
That my supreme inheritance, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Supremes.
So, where all have you taught? Where do you teach mostly?
Well, after finishing my training, we moved to, actually just about 3 or 4 months after finishing my training, we moved to Italy. And by that time, I'd left theatre a while back, and I went into kind of business, and I'd run my own business, and when I'd finished my training, I sold. And then with that, we went to, myself and my wife, we went to live in Rome, and our idea was to live in Rome for a couple of years, to have that experience of being in another culture, rather than just visiting it, for a week. And that was that was very surprising, because I'd had my idea being a new teacher. Well, I'll put out my shingle, I might see a couple of people a week, that's fine, But because I was the only teacher there in Rome, actually in the whole of Italy at one point, then a lot of people started to come. So within 6 months, I had a jam-full practice, which was crazy. And throughout my time there, I had a full practice and a waiting list. So, and the Italians are very, very supportive. Once they get to know you, they really kind of look after you, send you their relatives and their friends, and that's how it works there. So even though the idea was that we'd go for a year or two or something, we ended up we stayed another, and then another, and we ended up staying there like 5 or 6 years. So, yeah.
So, do you find that there's a difference in the mindset of students, European students, as opposed to American students?
Yeah.
And what is it?
I think, from being in America for a long time, it's very different in that I think Americans feel that they need to be sold on this before they commit. They need to know what they're getting, the bang for the buck stuff. In Italy, you don't do that. You come along, you experience, they're fine. They don't need to have it prepackaged. And also, in Italy, you never talk about money. It's kind of like brutta figura, you don't do that kind of thing. You ask what the fee is, and it's automatic. There's never discussion. You don't have to hear like long stories about, what the tragedy is of not having enough money for the lessons, etc., which can easily be solved because, it's X amount I charge, and if people got problems, they pay less. So, but there's that, dare I say, preoccupation with the money thing that I didn't find in Italy or.
Moving along, just changing gears a little bit.
Good.
How would you define Alexander technique to someone who didn't know what it was?
Depends who they are. We can have stock phrases, and of course, you learn a stock phrase for, if you're at a bullshit cocktail party or something, that's fine, because people can ask you, and that they're not genuinely interested, they're just being, kind and polite, and that's fine, but then it depends how they ask. I find the better ways to turn it around, to ask people what they're looking for, what they need, and what their interests are. And yes, and then we can give, certain stock phrases, the Alexander technique. It teaches us how to move and express ourselves with appropriate tension, balance, and freedom. But, any definition doesn't cut it. Why? Because it's an experience. And the more people understand that what is this experience? Well, then that brings us to the whole idea of, the kinesthetic experience that's created. And this is a skill that is completely unique, as far as I know, to Alexander technique. That through the kinesthetic skills that are taught in the training courses, one learns to recognize how people are holding themselves, and we call that the misuse, how they're holding tensions or how there may be lack of tensions in certain areas. And then we learn to see that, and then through the kinesthetic skills, we learn to undo those interferences so that then we actually release. If I hold my fist up, okay, and then I let it go, it's an undoing. I don't try to do it to put it in a position. That just gets us going around the block over and over again. But it's that undoing. And that's a simple example, of course, from the fist. But actually, when you take in the whole self, we actually undo interconnection. So we undo the misuse patterns. And these are not just general, they're very specific to many different people who come to us. That's why we need to train our eyes to see that. And then they learn to undo these habits. And the more that we undo, we actually connect. Why? Because we're already connected in nature, but we interfere with that with the way that we very poorly adapt to our world. So, of course, so much is coming at us, so much stimulus, and there's so much embodied response, etc., to that stimulus. And then there's having to adapt to things like furniture, or adapt to the way that we live, adapt to the lifestyle, adapt to these objects, etc. And that adaptation can easily cause a crisis, because it creates so much unnecessary tension that it easily can descend to injury and, of course, a lot of discomfort, which is why a lot of people come to the technique, because they've tried other avenues. And this is an educational approach where people have to learn how these principles work. They learn the kinesthetic skills with a good teacher, and then they learn to apply that to their everyday life. What I do say to people who come to work with me is it's work. You can't just come to the guy around the corner who's got a bag of tricks. Is that, yes, we learn in the studio to release, to connect, etc., to undo, to recognize these habits of misuse, to undo them, to find connection, and to take that into movement and expression. But then what's created in the studio that needs to be taken outside of the studio, so that then when the students are applying the principles of the work, it can connect again. It constellates the kinesthetic experiences that they had in the studio, and in that way that bridge is made. That's why when students come back, we can follow their process. We want to know how they're working. And of course, a lot of people think it's just about movement. It's not. It's everything. But it's really the ease of movement, but also the ease of expression. So everything connects. Whenever there's a tension, there's tension, domino effect throughout the whole structure. But when you release has a domino effect too.
So what do you think makes a good student?
Although I was saying earlier, I questioned quite a lot. I think people who come and don't believe it up front are the best. I don't want people to come in with a belief system, right? And I think they just come as themselves too, however they are. But someone who is prepared to be challenged, as well as being challenging, but also who is prepared to work. It's not, they say my back hurts, we want a pill and fix it. Well, I'm sorry, we have to work with the root causes. Our mindset in our culture is that we want the quick fix. My understanding, there ain't no quick fix. It's just that want and the desire for that quick remedy. And we address that very, very much in this work, which is very focused on this goal orientation mentality within all our activities. So therefore we're addressing not just the movement as far as analysis is concerned, what's happening to this bit, that bit, and the other, but what's the thinking within that movement and within that expression. That's really core. So
from my understanding, you can have an experience almost immediately with
Yes.
Alexander technique. But in your experience, about how long does it take before before it changes their life materially, aside from the lessons?
Well, I like to say 1/10 of a second. Because that's how changes are made. They can only be made, in a moment. And to come with, the idea of, how long will the process happen? I mean, okay, how long did it take, Claudio Arrau, the pianist, to become a great pianist? Then we get back to how long's a piece of string stuff, Yeah, people, of course, are concerned about time commitment and money. That's practical. Everybody is. It depends what state you come in, how open you are to adapting to this work, to using it. But what I like to say to people is that you learn this work to the point where you become your own teacher, and then you get rid of me.
So, speaking of teachers, what do you think makes a good teacher?
Skill. I think that's essential. Because, yes, we can teach the principles to people. We can study Alexander's writings. But when people come into a studio, you can't just, preach principle to them. Because what does it relate to? See, what Alexander understood very, very clearly is that we have this, what he called faulty sensory awareness, where our kinesthetic sense is ski-whiff. Explaining that very simply, if I stand up and I'm standing over to the right, and then, one works with someone like that and puts them into a more balanced position, etc., they'll oftentimes say, well, I feel I'm falling over to my left. So that our sensory awareness has been compromised. So, then what the teacher develops is that the skill in being able to see that, but also to develop the skill in the hands. The hands, you can't use just the verbal upstairs language for telling people to change. It's the wrong language. It's the kinesthetic language and the skill in the hands that make changes and give the opportunity of a person making a change in their whole way of being. That means being at ease. So a teacher has these qualities if they work on them and if they develop them, but it's also an art. It really is. Yes, there's a science to it, and there's a lot of work done in that area that's actually very creative. But really, the hands-on skills are very, very important in my book, and really can make an enormous difference on people's lives.
So I would assume that there are people who are sort of naturally have good hands, or who come to good hands easier than other people, and then there are other people for whom I would guess it's a struggle.
Well, you see, I thought that was me. And that was my real concern in my training, that, I'm not very good with my hands, I was told, whenever I tried to, you could repair cars in those days. Unfortunately, I tried to. And, they're always worse, so I had to give that up. So I was concerned about that, but just exposing myself to the work and the work in the teacher training course I went through and the development of those skills, the work, it showed up. It was there. It's hard to detect, at first, who's going to be, you could have an absolutely phenomenal pianist who's great with their hands. Well, they might not be so hard at teaching Alexander technique. Or they might be.
Would you say that there is a connection between being able to send directions with your hands and the sort of energy movement work that's done in some of the Eastern philosophies?
Well, we say the hands because that's the connection. Actually, it's not the hands. It's intent. The Eastern disciplines, that's with the yogas and tai chis, etc., which of course can be wonderful. Again, what needs to be taken into account is Western misuse. If you think of the Eastern disciplines, well, you take yoga, well, at the time that it was developed, or Tai Chi, in the earlier days, people were probably a lot smaller, and they were used to sitting on the floor all the time. They had very, very different movements, and now, we eat a lot, and we seem to come out a lot bigger overall. But we developed these misuse patterns, the stiffness in hips, etc., and certainly stiffness in hamstrings in these areas because of sitting, compressing these areas. Then when you get the distorted Westerner who is working at his desk all the time doing this, going to Tai Chi, those habits get involved into the process. Now, you can see it and people can come and push it down and straighten it out, but that doesn't work. That's just moving tension around into positioning. Any kind of undoing or release needs to be done on the level of the whole self. This is what's understood in this work, not just in a particular movement. So therefore, a lot of people who do Pilates, yoga, Tai Chi, etc., come to Alexander work to enhance their form. Because then they're dealing with their Western misuse patterns that interfere with the ability to freely go into Tai Chi work, which is actually a lot of Alexander teachers actually transition into Tai Chi work and yoga work, etc., all come from those backgrounds.
Well, I would imagine that anything in which you use the body would benefit from the being able to release the tensions and use the body differently.
Yes, and using the body differently means the way that we use the mind. Because they're coming back to it's really conscious intent, which is the essence of direction. The old adage of, energy follows thought, or people understand, of course, doing Tai Chi, etc. It's very apparent, or in acupuncture, that there's a whole energy structure and system in ourselves. And, so with the work with the hands, we can access that more and more.
Okay. Well, where do you think Alexander, as a technique, as a school, as a practice, is going? Sort of what's the future of Alexander, or where is the future headed?
Okay, this is the Gypsy Rose Lee question, right? Where's it going? Hopefully, its essence is going to be realized by a culture that desperately needs it. So that's where I'm going. Now, a lot of people assume that because of time, that there's an automatic evolution. There's an automatic understanding. Well, I think it works both ways. I think there can be, of course, because there's some fabulous work being done in research that validates what we already know, as it should. But also, when I go back to working with some of the teachers I did in my earlier times, who trained with Alexander, etc., there was an amazing development of craft. And I hope that is still going to be a major focus of the work. And
because we are, one of the things that people lament about our current society is that we're becoming so attuned to instant gratification.
Yes.
Because everything has to happen now.
Yeah.
If I can't look it up in Google on my phone in 20 seconds,
yeah,
shorter than that, in 10 seconds.
Yeah. No, I see it. I actually worked at Google for a couple of years. Yes, that there's so much, frenetic activity that goes on in the workplace. So much stimulus that comes at people, deadlines and things like that. So when we went to Google and worked there, we were trying to address that somewhere. But there was 20,000 people at that time. There's more now, but a lot of the people who came to the technique there really saw that. So thinking needs to be addressed, patterns of thinking, and going back to what I was mentioning earlier about this end gaining, this goal focus. And all this stimulus coming at us, from this texty stuff and everything, and we need to find a way to not get overwhelmed physically by all that stimulus coming at us, and to really affect, a reasonable way of choosing how we respond, instead of just being fired up into these automatic, unconscious patterns. That was Alexander's focus. She said, you couldn't rely on instinct anymore, given the way that the world was changing so much, that the next development in so-called evolution, I suppose, is conscious adaptation. That is not on the radar screen. But where's the work going in future? Hopefully to the radar screen.
So if you had some advice to give to someone who was just starting out in Alexander,
Yeah.
who was just beginning the path,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Continue. It's worth it.